Ben Orenstein. How's it going, man?
Good, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great to connect. We were actually just able to hang out in person at MicroConf a couple weeks ago. That was fun.
Yeah, that was awesome.
You know, you're one of the several people I'm friends with who I met on the internet and then met in real life several times. And like, still every time I hang out with you in person, it's like, damn, I forgot how tall Ben is. It's like,
Yeah,
it's like everyone I know is either like way taller or like shorter than I imagine they are on Twitter.
that is a thing I get consistently. I honestly thought about putting that in my dating app or my dating app profile, being like,
Right,
no matter what I tell you, you're still going to be surprised by how tall I am in person. This just
right,
always
right.
happens.
I'm probably on the other end of that. I'm probably like shorter than most people think. Um, so, people obviously know you from Art of Product and your work on Tuple. I definitely recommend Art of Product. I listen to it, almost every episode. And so, you know, I, I think for that reason, I don't want to go too much into your work on Tuple because you share so much of it publicly, kind of week to week over there. Um, what I'm more interested in, and even just knowing you for a few years, I feel like there's some backstory to Ben Orenstein that I don't really know that I'm kind of curious about. So what I want to know is about, and the other thing that you and I have in common, we're both from like the Northeast here. So
hmm
where did you grow up originally? Were you originally from the Boston area? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. I was born in Western Mass, lived there for a while, and moved to Colorado and North Carolina for sort of 3 or 4 year stints when I was much younger, but mostly Massachusetts. So I'm more or less a asshole.
Right, right on. And so what were you doing like as a kid? Like what does young Ben Orenstein look like? Is it like, are you into sports, into music, into computers back then? Like what's that looking like?
Yeah. Played a lot of soccer. Wasn't amazing at it. Was not like a gifted athlete, I would say. Um, did a lot of singing, which I think we want to touch on later.
Hmm.
But started at a very early age. I grew up in like a musical household, so there was just like singing happen all the time, and like a cappella Christmas carols and things like that.
Oh
So
wow.
music was a big thing from a pretty early age. Um,
Brothers, sisters?
yep, I have a younger brother. He does sales for a software company, so we're kind of in the
Really?
similar business now. Yeah,
What's
it's
the
the
what's the
family
age
business.
difference?
3.5 years. And my dad was
Okay.
also in sales in the high tech industry. He worked for AMD, the chip makers,
Hmm.
for most of his career. And so that was actually really nice because he was in the tech industry. I got into computers at a young age. Like we had a computer at our house before a lot of people did, I think. And
Yeah,
I discovered at a quite early age that I was obsessed with this particular thing and wanted to play with it all the time.
that's cool. Yeah, I mean, my dad wasn't in the tech industry, but he was sort of like one of like the early adopters of computers, getting really excited about it. So like the old school like Prodigy service
Oh yeah,
and all
we had
that.
Prodigy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
forget sometimes that was like that was lucky. Like I had a lucky break there, where I just
yeah.
was exposed to this thing early on, and and that the thing that I like fell in love with actually turned out to be like a legitimate career. Like I
Yeah.
could, it wasn't like French poetry that I got really into or something by
Totally. I
happenstance. It
want to
was
hear more about that in just a bit, but
yeah.
it's about I have a younger brother too. He's about 2 years younger than me, and we've been super close like our whole lives. But you said your brother's in software sales. Mine is a farmer. Like we
Wow.
like he literally has like 40 cows and they produce milk and yogurt and cheese. It's like
Wow.
like we couldn't be more different in what we're doing
Seriously.
as careers. It's so
Does
funny.
did he stay in like the Northeast?
Yeah, his farm is in northern Connecticut,
Okay. Wow.
northwest Connecticut. Yeah.
Do you ever feel weird like that you just like you don't actually make anything, like anything tangible?
uh, Sometimes.
Yeah.
I never really had the yearning for like physical products, but yeah, like when I think about what he's doing every day, you know, he's like up at 3 in the morning milking cows. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I want to do that.
You know. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway. So okay, so music is kind of a big deal for you. Yeah, I definitely want to do a deep dive in music a little bit later on. You played some soccer, had some early exposure to tech stuff. Um, where'd you end up going to school or after high school? What did that look like?
Yeah, I went to University of Massachusetts at Amherst.
Okay, I remember visiting there. I don't think I applied there, but it was one of them. One of the Northeast schools. I feel like everyone in the Northeast at least has to have that on like the list, or, or a lot of people do.
It's kind of funny actually. It was not really on my list. It was my like backup.
Uh-huh.
I was like sort of into these like more engineering focused schools or like music focused schools, like Ithaca or Union College or things like that. And so I got into a few of these places and I went to visit them, and they were like all of these like, already back then even like really expensive private colleges. And I remember thinking, I was like, okay, I'm gonna decide between, one of these, obviously. And my dad was like, you have to go see UMass. And I was like, okay. He's like, I was like, but I think I want to go to one of these. Like, no, you have to go see it. And by the way, if you go to UMass, I'll pay for everything. But if you go to one of these private schools, you're gonna have to take out loans.
Yep.
And I was like, okay. And that didn't really mean much to me at the time because I didn't really have a conception of what that difference really would look like.
Oh, yeah.
But knowing now, that was Dad doing me solid.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things I always sort of regret is I ended up going to school in the Midwest, Indiana University, and then Columbia College in Chicago. But I always sort of regret like not choosing one of those Northeast schools because like I just really didn't stay in touch with any of my friends from college after college. And most of it was travel related. And, we had the internet, but it wasn't like it is today where it's so remote and easy to stay in touch. Like traveling in distance was a much bigger deal in like around like 2000, 2003, 2004, Yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, I went to school, an hour and a half from where I live now, and I'm friends with, I think, one person from those days. So,
right.
I mean, and it's a great relationship. He's awesome, but
yeah,
might not have been that much different.
Yeah, I'm much closer still today with like my group of friends from high school. We've all sort of stayed in touch. So I mean, I guess still like young Ben Orenstein. I'm wondering because I think about this sometimes. Like, what did you sort of see like the stupid question of like what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were starting to think about that as a kid, right?
Honestly, it was something in computers pretty fast.
It was.
Yeah. Once I like really discovered computers and dove into them, it was kind of like, what can I do that's this? How is this? And so I think yeah.
What about like entrepreneurship? Were you thinking like I'm into software, but you were not thinking like products or business?
No, not yet. It was in the beginning. It was just like I want to program computers. I want to do this all day long. And it was like I didn't really have a conception of like IT versus like programming or whatever. I just like knew like computers. These are cool. I want to do these. And then as I got a little bit older and was in like high school, I think I like was in like computer science seems to be the major. I assume that's what I'm going to do.
And that's what you ended up majoring
in. Yep.
That's another regret that I think about is like, now that I am in software, like as a developer, as a basically self-taught developer, with the help of a lot of other stuff, but like, having that CS degree, I feel like would have given me a lot more underpinning of everything that I ended up sort of, I feel like I learned a lot by doing and figuring out and learning during the career. But, I think about these like career software people who have that like understanding of how computers work from the inside out that really could have helped,
I'd push back on that a little bit. A lot of a computer science degree, at least when I was doing it, was like, well, first of all, you need to take a ton of math. Like I took, 3 calculus classes and linear algebra classes and all these things. And it was like, okay, I guess that's kind of like linear algebra. I guess if you want to do machine learning, that's useful. Otherwise, not that much, maybe, or like graphics programming or something. But a ton of math, none of which I find relevant today.
Sure.
Some theory courses which may be interesting, like the theory of computations, like what is like a state machine and how do you make, what are the fundamental essences of a computer, which are kind of interesting, but it's a little bit like it's a little bit like you want to be a race car driver, and I make you take a ton of classes on like combustion engines and learn all the equations for how a piston works. And it's like, yeah, that kind of helps, but kind of not really.
Well, I got into it from the standpoint of a designer and products first, and then kind of working backwards from like, what do I need to know or figure out in order to make a product on the internet, right?
Yep.
And that's super useful, like practically, to be able to like basically ship features and ship products. But I do find when I'm like planning features and architecting them and scoping out features for me and my developers, like I do feel like limited in terms of like, man, if I had the experience of working from the inside out, this would be a lot easier or more efficient,
That's true. I don't really think you probably can't get that in a class. My sense is there's like a certain amount of wisdom to programming where you kind of have to just do it a bunch and be like, oh, I've been burned by this and not by this. And like, you kind of have to see how decisions work out over time. And my program in particular was not that. They were not teaching that wisdom. It was, so it's, computer science was kind of like an accidental beneficiary of the popularity of computers, where it was never really meant to be a like, here's how you make great products or even here's how you be a good programmer. It was just the best fit that was already in an accredited program where there was a curriculum and everything. And it never has been really the best path, I think, if you want to make products.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm also kind of wondering about just computer science in general, where it's like, it's that classic thing of like, if you study it in school, like how far behind the times is it in terms of real world industry, right? There must be some level of CS that is just, this is science, this is fundamentals, right?
Yep.
It's always going to apply. But languages come and go, trends come and go, framework come and go. Like, what do you think that's looking like today for anyone listening who's sort of college age thinking about computer science?
College is really fun. I think you should probably go. There's not a lot of times where you're going to get to do what you get to do in college, and it's an amazing life experience. And so you should probably do it from that perspective. Try not to go into a ton of debt to do it, because it's probably not worth that. Unless you're if you're majoring in computer science, you can probably pay off your loans. You'll probably be successful there. But I think you should mostly, like, my opinion of college is like, it's mostly a boondoggle financed by your parents / the government. And so you should like go have that incredible experience, because it is really fun, and like living by yourself for the first time, it's great. So I think there's a lot of lessons and like enjoyment to be had there. But if you're not that into that idea, and you're just like, I want to know how to like make things, like I would say like a computer science degree is probably the slowest path to that. And like a boot camp is going to be a much better choice for you. Yeah,
for sure. I'd agree with that. Okay, so coming out of school, where are you going? Like, what's your first step out of school in terms of like, all right, got to figure out the whole career thing?
Well, so maybe I gave a clue to it in describing college as fun more than anything else, but I was not a good student. I went into college kind of lacking self-discipline and study skills and such, and computer science was like too hard to sort of fake my way through or half-ass my way through. So right at the end of my junior year, my GPA fell low enough that they kicked me out.
No shit. Dude, I never would have guessed this about you, for real. Like, I really always assumed that you, because, I don't know, this is sort of like the vibe that you put off, and like how you go about your work today and stuff. Like, you seem super disciplined, and you seem like super like kind of on top of it.
I appreciate that. And I think I mostly am today. Like, I'm a very different person than I was at 18.
Yeah.
Fortunately. So yes, I think I'm glad to hear that. I was not that way back before. I'm glad I figured it out. But honestly, I think it was actually that experience of getting kicked out of school. I felt very ashamed. And it was like quite a wake up, where it was like, this is not how I want my life to go. Like, after I got kicked out, I got the first job I could find, like, as quickly as possible, which was bartender at the Olive Garden. And I was like, just hating life, basically, living with my parents, tending bar in the mall. Yeah. And I was like, this is not quite what I wanted.
Yep.
But it was good for me. I'd sort of lived, my life up to that point had kind of been without consequence in a way. Like, I lived like a very sheltered life, and I had always kind of gotten away with all of the shenanigans I was pulling. And this is the first time it really came home for real. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what consequences are like, and this is all my fault, and I'm gonna have to change if I don't want this to keep going on.
Yeah. I remember I was waiting like right after or a year or two after college. I was living at my parents' house, my dad's house, waiting tables at California Pizza Kitchen at the mall.
Nice. Another chain, yes.
Yeah. Oh man.
You had a name tag, got non-slip shoes.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had like the same like white shirt and tie that I wore like 5 times a week with all this shit all over it, and
yeah,
like memorizing their menu like inside and out, every ingredient. It's like, oh my god, and then dealing with all these people, customers. Yeah, not fun. Not the kind of customer support experience that I actually want to have. But I guess looking back, it was probably a good time for. I didn't have a good time, but it was probably good for me to go through that.
Yep, that's how I feel about it as well.
Yep.
So I started kind of clawing my way out of that hole that I had dug. So I eventually, after maybe not that many, maybe 3 months from that, I like found an IT consulting gig where I was like a drive around Boston and like spend a half day at like various client sites, like installing patches on their Windows servers and like helping people find the email they deleted and stuff like that, working for this like little kind of small IT consulting firm. And that was like a nice upgrade because at least I was in tech, I was like, I was doing tech stuff. And
what year was this?
This is probably 2006 or so.
Okay.
Yep. 2005, 2006. Wow. Only 16 years ago. How about that? And
we're around the same age. That's around, I think I graduated in 04.
I would have graduated in 2005 if I had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So I mean, I met you I think when you were at Thoughtbot. What was like the path from there into working at Thoughtbot?
Yeah. So from Olive Garden to IT consulting, and then from IT consulting, I did a brief stint in sales at that place, like trying to sell the consulting services. It didn't go that well. And then I got an entry-level programming job at this place called Meditech that makes hospital software, hospital suites, like suites of hospital software. And that was great because now I was working as a programmer in tech, but the environment there was like crazy. Like they had like the crazy like not invented here syndrome, and like we're using all these weird proprietary technologies. So I really was not building up any sort of useful transferable skills. So I was still kind of like very unhappy with my career outcome. From Meditech, I landed a Rails job, which is the first time I was suddenly working in like a real, a language that more people used in a framework that was growing in popularity. I'd kind of like was starting to catch on to Rails, which was taking off. This is like a Rails like 2.3 days or something, like pretty early on. And that was really useful because I did a ton of pair programming with a more experienced person and got me up to speed, like taught me actually how to be a software developer, like taught me the engineering practices.
Like pair programming, ding. Like that's gonna make sense for you later on.
yeah, right, exactly. Yep, that was very formative and showed me the engineering practices. It was like, how do you actually make software beyond just like knowing how to write Ruby? How does a team actually make a product and keep it going and update it and deploy it?
I think back a lot to my first real job, like after the waiting tables. I started as an intern and then an employee at a web design agency in New York. And I had hacked around with HTML and CSS before that, but I remember telling the person who hired me, I want to go from like amateur to professional at designing and building websites. And I was there for about 3 years, and I don't think I would call it pair programming, but I physically sat next to a person who just mentored the hell out of me in terms of like, here's how CSS really works. And he was a few years older than me, more experienced. Just so incredibly valuable, like literally sitting next to him and feeling terrible about bugging him every 5 minutes when I run into a hitch. But like, he was so nice about showing me how things work. And then the other thing that I remember about those years was my manager, who would task me with these little projects, like, okay, we need you to build this navigation menu on Coca-Cola's website, right? Massive visible website and stuff, and I don't know what I'm doing. But she was like, you got to figure out how to do this crazy design that the designers came up with. Like, it it exists over on that other website. Pepsi does it. So it must be possible. Go figure out how to do it. Like,
Nice.
look at the source code, undo it, and figure it out. And like, that was such a valuable skill set to learn. And like, I was so frustrated going through it, but like, then you just get better and better about figuring out how to build something that somebody else has built, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, anything like that, like in those, like, so you're getting started with Rails, where it's like, in terms of like workflows or skill sets that kind of unlocked superpowers that lasted the rest of your career. Like that, like for me, that's one of them. It's like the ability to like figure out how to build something, you know?
It's hard to break it down. I mean, I learned so many. I feel like I basically went from because, so like I touched on, there really was not that much programming in my computer science degree. There was some, but not a lot. I was doing some programming at Meditech, but not any sort of modern programming. And so when I joined this place, it's called Dana-Farber. It's a cancer research institute. When I joined Dana-Farber, I was actually writing Ruby in a Rails app next to somebody kind of all day long, and we would like pair program, like I would plug a keyboard into his computer, and we would sit next to each other, and we would like tackle things together, and he would review all my pull requests and gave me a ton of feedback. And being right next to a like person that cared a lot about the craft of programming and knew a lot about it was really what actually turned me into a software engineer, like someone who could make something happen for real. Because there's like 5,000 things around programming that are involved to like actually like get a product out the door. And so it's not just like, do you understand Ruby syntax? Do you know what the object hierarchy looks like? It's like, yeah, sure, that's part of it, but there's like a million other things along that goes with it. This is around when I started learning Vim, for example, which became like a pretty core part of my toolkit. I'm still a Vim user today, like years later, more than a decade later.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So, all right, Thoughtbot. That's when I first that came next in the timeline for you. So, like, for those who don't know, I mean, Thoughtbot is a really well known Ruby on Rails consultancy, right? They work on pretty huge, mostly client projects. They have some products of their own, right? And then they run several pretty big open source gems and whatnot for the Rails ecosystem.
Yep.
How did you get in there? What was your path like within Thoughtbot?
I was in the same. So the Thoughtbot headquarters was in Boston, and I was living outside Boston. And I met one of the partners at a Boston Ruby meetup, Dan Croak, who was sort of like he eventually became the CMO there. He was like the pretty actually kind of official ambassador of Thoughtbot into the world. Kind of a born keeper in touch sort of person, like a really great networker in that sense. And so he and I met up at the Ruby meetup, and we stayed in touch. And then I think the next major thing was that there was the Rails Rumble, where which is like a hackathon over the weekend. And I think I ended up, he invited me to his team, which had him and a couple other Thoughtbotters on it. And so I got to do a Rails project with him. Nice. And that was super useful for all the networking reasons you might assume. And somewhere after that, I believe, they decided to hire some more people, and he sent me an email and said, "Hey, we're hiring people. Are you interested? Like, you're my first email. Are you interested?"
Nice.
And I had some doubts, at the time. I was like, Thoughtbot is like, they're like the top. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to I remember the thing that I was most worried about was because it was high hourly rate client work. I remember feeling like there's no way I'm going to be able to produce enough work that the clients are going to feel like they're getting value for this money. I don't think I can work that hard for that long. I was worried about my ability to work enough to justify our consulting rates. But I fortunately had a friend, actually the friend from college, the one that has remained. He refused to hear that. He's like, no, you're doing this. You're trying it. You get in there and give it a shot. Don't be an idiot.
Huh. So I mean, within Thoughtbot, I mean that sounds like it's a kind of like a step up in your career, right?
For sure.
So like networking wise, I'm assuming like salary wise, right? Like
Oh yeah.
you're getting a bump up.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
then you
think
were
I
there
was.
for several years, right? Like,
Yeah. So Thoughtbot was a huge shift in the curve for me.
mm-hmm.
Like so, part of it was that I was learning even more about how to be a good programmer. Like we used to have these weekly dev discussions, and like the CTO of Thoughtbot, Joe Ferris, would like just come in with a topic and like teach us things, and he was like unbelievable. He's the best programmer I've ever met still. And so I got to kind of like copy a lot of stuff out of his brain and into mine. Thoughtbot cares a lot about code quality, and there's like there's such a strong culture of just like producing really good codes. There's a ton of people who want to help you with this and have strong opinions and will, kind of contribute to your learning there. And I was super into it at the time, so I was just soaking it up as much as possible. And but so another major thing happened during my Thoughtbot time, which is that I went from originally I was a consultant at the company. I was writing Ruby code for clients just like everybody else. At some point, I got the bug to try to make a digital product. And so Peep Code was this series of screencasts that were really popular at the time. Like really highly produced screencasts on technical topics, including stuff in the Ruby world. And he put out this screencast on like how to make screencasts. And so I got it and watched it, and I was like, I can do this. And so I decided to make a screencast about, and the title was Vim for Rails Developers. And it was about all these like sort of like workflow hacks and stuff that I had put together and learned. And I made a screencast and I put it up for sale for $9, and it started selling. And that was kind of like my introduction to like, oh my God, you can make money on the internet and it's amazing.
Yeah. That was your personal product and project.
Personal product at first. Yeah, exactly. I did that on the weekend. That's slightly predated Thoughtbot now that I think about that. I'm mixing the timeline up a little bit, but yeah, that was before Thoughtbot. But I had this taste where I was like, this is amazing. I want this.
Yeah.
And so I started.
There's nothing like that very first selling something digital to a stranger on the internet.
Unbelievable. Amazing. My heart started pounding the first time I like got my first sale notification. I just like couldn't believe it. I felt like I was like just like on drugs.
I totally remember that too. Like I was selling web design services for thousands of dollars, but then I sold a WordPress theme for $49. And it was like, oh my God, like I can't believe.
Yeah, there's nothing like the email that says you got money and you don't have to do anything it. It's already there. There's no more follow up. It's done. Like
exactly.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
That's just like, oh my God.
When did the podcast? Because your first podcasting stuff was through Thoughtbot.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So some major things happened at Thoughtbot. So one was I started a podcast. Actually, they encouraged me to start hosting their podcast. So it's called Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots. And the CEO, Chad, there said he thought that I would do a good job hosting it and that they would handle all the production. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. And so I started off as an interview show, which ended up being amazing for my career because I just got to interview all the major personalities in the industry. Like Thoughtbot was well known. And so it was like, I want to come on the Thoughtbot podcast? Yeah, sure. So I was interviewing DHH and a bunch of other Rails core contributors and kind of anybody interested in the open source world and other business owners within the space. So awesome. that was just great and super useful. And then also I discovered that I loved giving conference talks. So they had a reimbursement program where they would cover all your expenses if you were speaking at a conference. So I just started applying like crazy. And it was partly, honestly, I wanted to do some traveling on the Thoughtbot credit card. I was like, well, there's a Ruby conference in Australia. I need to fly to Australia and give this talk.
I mean, of everyone that I know who, everyone comes from some previous gig before you go out on your own. But like, you really had like one of the most optimized, like pre-entrepreneurship career building blocks in there. I mean, not only just from learning and being part of Thoughtbot, but frankly, just building an audience for yourself, even though it was you're from Thoughtbot, right?
Totally. Yes. It was a big win-win. Like I would go on stage and like, I'm Ben Orenstein, I work at Thoughtbot. And so Thoughtbot was, getting good impressions of it, but also I was getting, 50 to 100 Twitter followers every time I gave a talk or more. And often they would get, recorded and put on YouTube and pointed back at me. And I was just steadily building up this group of people who thought I knew what was up because I was doing a good job on talks.
Yeah, pretty sweet. I mean,
What,
so I mean, I did want to sort of like navigate to your decision to leave and go out on your own and then eventually get into Tuple. But what I'm kind of curious about, correct me if I'm wrong, but like again, like you have this sort of amazing role at Thoughtbot you had, right? And
mm-hmm.
I mean, like, did that make it difficult to make the decision like that you do want to leave, or was it something that you were always planning on and aiming your trajectory at, like eventually I'm definitely gonna go out on my own, or was it like a, man, this is a cushy job here, really works out well, like was it a tough decision?
So there's one other major thing that happened at Thoughtbot that I think sort of leads into the answers to those questions, which is my screencast was still selling, and I found myself wanting to make more, and also I was having a lot of success giving talks and workshops and things like that. And Thoughtbot was also putting on like the expensive in-person workshops and such. And one day I went to Chad, the CEO, and said, I think we should take all the content I've made and the content that Thoughtbot has made, and we should put it behind a subscription. And we should sell it to people, like build a community around it. There's a lot of people that want the knowledge that's inside this company, and we should make an educational business. And to his credit, Chad was like, yeah, I agree. Go ahead. That was a big thing at Thoughtbot. That's like probably one of their biggest strengths. I feel like was just like, you want to start a thing, like start the thing. Like don't even ask about it. Like
that's a great idea. That's a great idea for you to go do.
Yeah, exactly. You want to do it? Do it. Yeah. Yep. And that was a really strong vibe there, and that was, I think, really a strength of Thoughtbot's culture and Chad's management style.
Yeah.
Because I did, and we spun up this like business unit inside the company, and we called it Upcase, and we started making more and more courses. We created like a weekly shorter kind of tips video, a lot of significant educational material all together, and made it like a recurring revenue business. And so I got to practice building like an educational subscription SaaS, more or less. And that got to be pretty large. I mean, I think it was $30K a month or something at its peak. Like it was a pretty decent sized business. It was never quite as good as the consulting business. But it was, it was real. It was like my first, like, hey, I'm making a thing from scratch, and like it has revenue and users, and I'm making decisions about it. And that taste of that was like, yes, this is where I want to be. Yeah. Like the intersection of like code and money and subscriptions was like, oh yes, this is even better than info products.
So I mean, from there, like what was the actual sequence of events where you were like, okay, like this is the year where I think I'm gonna go out on my own, or I sort of remember the early days of Tuple, and I remember you were sort of dabbling with a couple other, there was like a podcasting product in there, and like, I don't know. So like product wise for, and like in terms of like your next chapter, were you starting to, I know you partnered up, with Spencer and Joel, like, was all that like happening while you were still employed at Thoughtbot, or was it like go out on your own and that came together afterward?
Yeah, no, I was at Thoughtbot for 7 years, and that to me for a single job is like crazy. Like that was like a hell of a tenure, I think, especially in tech. So I was like overall so happy there, and it was very cushy. Or like I had been very happy there, and it had been a wonderful experience. But eventually, I sort of looked around and thought, like, I don't really know what's next for me, but I don't really see the next step here. I think I need to go out on my own for the next thing. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do on my own, but I knew I wanted to take a crack at it rather than like waiting around. And actually, this was kind of, as I was deciding this, I had a call with Rob Walling and was like, here's how much I've got saved. Here are some of the ideas I'm thinking of doing. Am I crazy to quit my job? And he was like, no, you're fine. Go for it. He's like, you're a good teacher. You could make educational products. I would encourage you to try that. SaaS is hard, but maybe try that someday if you want to. You got some programming chops, so maybe you could start that earlier than most people. But he didn't think it was very risky, and I pulled the trigger and left.
So like savings wise, you felt like you had enough time to figure something out.
Yeah, I think I had something like 10 months of savings at a reasonable burn rate, somewhere around there.
Right on.
Yeah.
And then, like I'm not going to get into the whole like story with Tuple and everything, but I am just curious about the very earliest days to kind of round out this whole segment here, like how you got from young Ben Orenstein to here. But like what I sort of remember about the early days of Tuple, like just Tuple as a product is a very complex thing to build from the ground up, right? And it was a really, I think it was like over a year of just building before it could be used. I mean,
about 9 months from breaking ground to having our alpha.
Got it. So what was that time period like, in terms of like, okay, we're building this thing. We think there's a market opportunity here, but you don't really have like first customers. Maybe you had like early commitments, but not a business yet, right? So,
right.
What was going on for you around that time?
I would say my dominant feeling was kind of cautious optimism. Mm-hmm. I was having success selling the idea of the product to people. People were paying us for early access ahead of time, like thousands of dollars. And when I told people about the idea, they seemed excited. And it seemed like, okay, when I sell this dream, people want the dream. They want to buy it. And the question was just like, can we deliver on the dream? Like, will we make something that is like close to what we're describing? And for a while, the answer was like, don't know. And it was kind of always like, it started off like no idea. And like it slowly turned from no idea to like maybe to like possibly. And with moments of, oh my God, definitely not, never. Oh my gosh. I actually remember an early, I think I did an alpha call with you one day. I had like a journal entry. Like you and I tried to use the product and it was just like a total disaster. And I was like, oh my God, we're never going to launch this thing. It's you were on some weird connection where you had like almost no upload bandwidth. And so the call was just like total trash.
I've since upgraded my connection since then, but I sort of remember even where I live now, like we don't get, fiber here. We're at whatever the highest cable offering is.
Same,
which is still not that high,
Mm-hmm. So that was actually like, that was supposed to be a few weeks before we were like hoping to launch. And like I tested it with you and it was like, oh my God, we are so far from ready. But fortunately the actual real problem was your upload bandwidth was terrible.
Yeah, exactly.
So you gave me a scare there.
What's I think kind of funny is that how you were saying like earlier, you started in software. You were always interested in software. You went into software schooling wise and career wise. You had a stint in sales that didn't go so well. And now when I think about your role in Tuple, you're the sales guy. At least you were for the first few years of it, right?
Yes.
Your partners are more on the technical side, and I think it's interesting how you've taken on that role of like you made the first sales, you helped, you talked to customers,
Yeah, it made sense to have me kind of be the face of the company because I came to it with a big audience, which was just so useful. And so I would say I am still to a decent extent the face of the company. Like I'm the one doing podcasts like these, although the team is growing and like there's more and more, more of our team members out there doing stuff like and reflecting back at the company, which is like a really cool transition to have happen. But I would actually say my focus these days, I hired someone to handle sales, like a head of sales. And so my focus mostly now is product, like hiring when we need to. Fortunately, we're paused on hiring for now because we have the team we want for the moment, and then product, which has been great. Like my day to day was writing up a shaped pitch for the next feature we're building.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. All right, let's shift gears here a little bit.
Okay.
We're gonna wrap up this segment. Well, thank you, Ben. It's always a great time to chat with you, and we'll keep it going.
Sounds good.